Hi Guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius, and for this week we will be taking a deep dive into Smash TV. But as usual, before we delve into the game, let's just have a look at this week's Amiga news. First up, someone from Team17.com actually got in touch saying he'd been listening to the Alien Breed episode many moons ago. I think that was episode 40 or 42, a very long time now. Anyway, they've just recently written a full 100 games list, which I think is in 4 different parts, going through the full Team 17 history. This is in celebration of, well, they've just hit that magic 100. I mean, it's hard to believe that they are still going. Now, you can find that on team17.com/team17-100-games-. I'm not reading out all that one, guys. I'm going to stick that into the show notes. It's a very extensive article. It's got notes from like developers and people involved and loads of stuff you just wouldn't pick up in like general magazines or articles or anything like that. It's a great read, and I hope it's going to help with episodes in future. Just as a little side note, I recently picked up a Secret of Monkey Island 2 mouse pad. Now, this is absolutely fantastic quality. It's a nice, slick, lovely material. It feels great to push a mouse along, and it's got that fantastic box art with LeChuck on the front holding up the Guybrush like voodoo doll. It's quality artwork. It looks amazing. I'm chuffed a bit to have it as a pad, and you can actually buy these from Rayadair Computers. I'll have to say that's RHAYADER computers.co.uk. They sell a huge range of all these different pads for lots of games. It's not just Amiga but Atari. I think Sega's in there. This isn't like a paid plug or anything. I just found this on Twitter, mentioned, and went and bought one straight away. They also do things like coffee mugs and mats and maybe pins and badges. I'm not too sure. I got getting a bit sidetracked there. Anyway, it's well worth having a look at. I'm sure there's something there that'll suit you all. Plus, they're really cheap and don't cost an arm and a leg. Next up is something I noticed on vintageisthenewOld.com, a brand new release of AMOS 2, which is in the works. Just reading through some of the blurb, Wansoir Lionette has established a Patreon to help fund development of AMOS 2, a successor to the popular AMOS Basic programming language and development studio he helped create for the Commodore Amiga. The original AMOS Basic became popular with coders looking to get started in games development, and various projects were released in the years following its release. AMOS 2 will leverage the power of JavaScript and modern technologies to include a level backwards compatibility with the original version, and there are also plans afoot to include a modern WebGL powered version of AMOS 3D. Lionette is planning to include a level of integration with the Friend platform, and an early version of the AMOS 2 toolset is expected to launch sometime in early November. Now, I'm not really into programming or stuff like that. It did sound interesting and certainly caught my eye, and I think the closest I ever came to any sort of Amiga programming would have been Blitz, or was it Blitz Basic, which was quite a popular language. That is going back about 20 odd years. I think it was quite expensive at the time. Anyway, if you're into Amiga programming and want to get involved in stuff like that, just follow the link which I'll put in the show notes and have a look at the Kickstarter. It's time to move on to this week's game. Now for this week I have picked Smash TV. Now this is actually something I have quite a lot of experience with, especially in the arcades. Now I was quite lucky growing up. I think it was probably every 4 or 5 months, a local fair, travelling fair that was, would pop from town to town, and they would have like these huge trucks absolutely loaded with arcade machines, and probably the earliest I ever played one. Bear in mind I was born in 79, 80, I can't even remember my own birthday. But you know, I was born many moons ago, and I was quite lucky in the sense that I grew up during all the arcade craze, and I actually remember playing arcade games like Star Wars, Donkey Kong, machines like that, and at one time I played Smash TV. Now this was a 2 joystick cabinet. I think one would move you around, the other stick would like fire the direction off. I think I'm remembering it correctly. It had some awesome artwork down the side. I thought it was absolutely awesome at the time. Now it came out quite late on. I was probably around 10 or 11 when I first played this in the arcade. I didn't actually find out what the release date this was. It has always stuck out in my mind though as the perfect representation in video game form of that Running Man movie game show. You know, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger in with the whole "I'll be back," and then he says that in every film, doesn't he? And the whole, he's playing out all this games to kill, gladiatorial combat, all these crazy things going on, and there's a huge studio audience there, and he's trying to win prizes, and I think it's a lifetime somewhere on some tropical islands with millions and millions of dollars. And this game sort of follows that whole genre, or I'm not sure what to call it. It's like semi-futuristic. It's not too far off into the far-flung future, but just enough that it would tickle the senses at the time and think, yeah, maybe in 15-20 years we'll be in this sort of a boat where this sort of thing is happening. Now sadly we haven't got anything like Smash TV or Running Man. That's probably a terrible thing to say, isn't it? People died on them things. No, it was all good wholesome entertainment, a bit like American Gladiators. God, do you remember that show? Wasn't that awesome? That's a blast from the past. In the UK though, it was all about Jet and Wolf and all huge Hunter and massive heroes like that kicking the crap out of these poor contestants every week. It wasn't really violent, or it always reminded me a bit of wrestling. With that in mind, I just wanted to pick something that will be fun to cover this week, something I played back in the arcade and I would hope had a good Amiga conversion. Smash TV was published by Ocean. Of course, they did games like Batman the Movie, Cool World, Elf, Hook, Kid Chaos. I think that's some sort of a platformer with a big guy that swings a club around, or I might be wrong there. Jurassic Park, Pang, loads and loads of movie license stuff, Untouchables, things like that. A huge company, and I'm sure we'll mention them many times in the future. Now, it was developed by Probe, and they did games like 1943, Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, Outrun, oh those are the guilty ones, Super Monaco GP, Terminator 2, the arcade game, I think that's the shooter, I might be wrong there, and of course one of my favourites, Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, the Coin Up, which is actually the beat 'em up and not that Konami style over the top explore 'em up game. It was released in 1991, it came on just one floppy disk, and it could have up to 2 players at once, priced at £24.95. The coder behind this, and full apologies if he ever listens because I don't think I'm ever going to have any chance of pronouncing this name correctly, Zarek Zeki Johans, or Johans, oh that sounds absolutely awful, sorry. He did games like Harley Davidson, that's like a road rash style behind the bike I think, Racer, Overlord, Power Drift, that's an awesome arcade racer, Super Hang-On and Super Monaco GP, lots of the arcade games, and Supremacy, which I believe is a sort of strategy spacey type game, or am I thinking of something completely different? I'm not sure. The graphics were drawn by Mark Knowles, who also worked on Golden Axe. That's definitely going to have to get a show at some point. I think I did have a look at that recently, but I had my usual problems where I couldn't get any emulator to run it correctly and be able to record footage at the same time. It's always a nightmare when that stuff happens. And sorry, that's a bit of behind the scenes info there, guys. Overlord, Supremacy, Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, I think that's the Coin Op game. Very good graphics on that, by the way. The music was done by Tony Williams. He was responsible for Viz, which was a huge still is I think, naughty comic, is that the right words for it? It's a bit like Mad Magazine if you're over in the US. Shinobi, Narc, Chucky Egg 2. I didn't have any idea, I mentioned that before actually, that it actually had an Amiga conversion or Amiga port. Beneath a Steel Sky, that is an awesome game. Judge Dredd, etc, etc. Loads and loads of titles would be here all day if I had to go through with them. Now this is just a straightforward Amiga arcade port. I did try and dig into it for some sort of interviews or history, and there's not really much about it. But however, I did manage to go back to the original arcade game story and dig out some interesting facts about that. Effectively, this is a port of that anyway, so all the ideas and the game design stuff, it's all following that philosophy and try to come up with their own conversion of it on the system. You probably won't know this, I had no idea when I discovered it, that Smash TV is actually a sort of spin-off sequel to the original Robotron, which was a huge arcade hit back in the 80s. It's a similar sort of run and gun shoot 'em up with a top down view, assuming of course I'm thinking of the right game and it's not just my memory playing tricks on me. The original arcade was designed and developed by Eugene Jarvis. Now, he decided to keep Robotron's wave gameplay, and it was kept simply because it had been so successful. They just added a few bosses throughout the levels with a sort of running man science fiction theme. He's admitted as much in interviews. I mean, that film did inspire an awful lot back in the day. It's a very good Stephen King book, by the way. Or is it Richard Bachman? I think he was doing it under a ghost name at the time. What the hell am I going on about? Anyway, back to the game. There were loads of bosses dotted throughout the game. Now pretty much all of them are based around very popular movies. You've got things like the Cobra, that's a boss that comes out of the ground. It's a nice scary snake head, and it's actually taken from Indiana Jones. You know, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it pops up out of the ground and you see it, and it's an interesting graphic to look at because it does look very similar. And even things like the tanks that roll around on huge tracks are all taken from the futuristic scenes over on The Terminator. And probably loads of bosses that I simply don't get the reference to. I'm not much of a movie person, but it's filled with them. They've all seemed to come over for the Amiga port, which is always a good thing. The game was actually in development for a whole 15 months, which I think is a bit out of the ordinary for an arcade cabinet. They tend to be at much shorter times than that. If you played the arcade game, you're probably quite familiar with the whole concept of the pleasure domes, which you're supposed to collect keys for. Originally, when the cabinet first came out, they didn't exist. You were just collecting the keys for absolutely nothing. But loads of people were ringing in because people are getting very addicted to this and find it a lot of fun to play and wanted to work out how the hell do we get to these pleasure domes. We're collecting all these keys, it doesn't seem to do anything. And it actually turned out that they just didn't exist. They ran out of time during development. But when people started ringing in and complaining and asking and getting crosser and crosser about where the hell were these things, they forced themselves to go back and added the extra sections in, and there's actually a later versions include the pleasure domes. They don't add too much to the game, but it's nice to be able to go back to them as a whole. I'm pretty sure I played this game all the way through because I have memories of playing it years and years later. Probably on, it must have been on some MAME cabinet somewhere. It's a very addictive game and well worth playing through. It was highly successful when it came out, and just as an example, when it first launched, or they were pushing out the test machines to get an idea of just who would want to play this, they put out loads of test machines on Times Square Arcade, which is on Broadway. I'm sorry, I don't know the whole of New York or the maps or anything, but it's over in the US anyway. And it just drew absolutely massive crowds. They'd not seen anything like this before. People were just sticking quarter after quarter inside. People just would not stop. So they knew they were onto a winner straight away. The game also has tons and tons of weapons dotted throughout the levels. These were all based around Xevious, Gallagher, Defender. That sounds very, very odd because those are shooters. But the fact that they had this power-up system for the weapons, it gave them the idea to use it on their own. And it's interesting to see how they use things like the rockets and the different types of bullets and things, and the spread shot, because it's sort of taken from those other games. Looking at various interviews and articles, for years now they've been getting ideas about doing sort of a sequel or a 3D follow-up, but it's never been the right time, or it's never really worked, so they've not gone anywhere with it. I'm not even sure if this would actually work. There was a sequel called Total Carnage. Now that does have an Amiga release. I'm sad to say I didn't really look into it much. It is something I experienced at an arcade down in Great Yarmouth, but I didn't really like it. It reminded me too much of the older Commando game. It wasn't as cheeky or as fun. It didn't seem to have that futuristic edge that the first one have. Yeah, it was set in the future and the whole domes, but it was more of a scrolling type game, and it wasn't focused in these little arenas and things like that, and I didn't feel it was as good a game as the first one. It was highly popular, of course, and it was ported to so many systems: Amstrad CPC, Atari STE and the E, Commodore 64, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES or NES, depending which part of the world you're from, Sega's Game Gear, Master System, I'm pretty sure I've played that one, Mega Drive, Genesis, ZX Spectrum, I definitely played that as a kid, and even a Sony PS1 conversion. I'm not sure if that's any different, or they've jigged it up slightly with a bit more fancy 3D graphics, because that seemed to be the way of things at the time. It was a huge arcade smash, and with this I think it's well worth covering and having a closer look at the Amiga version. Let's have a look at the game's story. Bored with TV game shows? If so, prepare yourself for the ultimate game show challenge. The prizes are wild, the stakes incredibly high. Are you mean enough to take part? If you accept, you stand to win enough money and prizes to make you fabulously wealthy, not forgetting the adoration of the totally TV orientated society. If you lose, you die. Good luck, and remember, smile, you're on TV. And straight away, a bit cheeky, that's the entire plot of the Running Man movie. Except with the game, there's just no Arnie involved. When you begin the game, you get a single screen top-down view in a square arena. You can see your character wandering around. He begins in a TV studio. You've got the announcer down there, which does actually come out with a few voices and moves, with the crowd watching and cheering away. It is actually quite good at this point because there's a lot of noise and it feels like a proper TV studio introduction. Now from this, you are led off into the main arena. Again, this is very Running Man-esque in style. Everything's very futuristic. It's all metallic walls and floors and robot-style enemies with humans mixed in the middle in there. Your character is a huge, big, muscly hero. He's almost more like Arnie out of Commando rather than in the Running Man when he's in these big, tight Lycra outfits. Now, for some strange reason, I'm having that Simpsons memory come back where he's like, oh, damn that sexy Flanders. Where the hell did that come from? I don't think I'm quite all the way there today, guys, so just bear with me whilst I reset my brain. Your main character, unlike Arnie, is actually just wearing a helmet and pants. At the same time, he is carrying a huge gun. Now, none of the graphics on the main character actually change when you get any of the extra items or weapons. It stays the same throughout the entire game. Now, the entire point of this is just to survive, to win and collect as many points and prizes and cash that is littered everywhere. The entire thing pushes you down this route of collect as much money as possible, earn loads and loads of points, get extra lives and survive through all the different sections of the bosses and rooms and stuff. It's very simplistic, it's very arcadey, it's that type of a game. Using the joystick or controller, you can move in all directions or lay off diagonally if you want. You can circle around on the spot and fire your weapon off like crazy. Pressing fire on the joystick just fires the current weapon. The default gun, it's just a pistol. It's a bit of a pea shooter. Doesn't really do much, but it will work on any of the bosses that you come across. Most of them, or any of the enemies really, will take a lot of shots to take out. You really need to be collecting extra items as you're wandering around. Now, what's unique about this game, especially for the time, if you hold down the Amiga key, your character will lock in a direction. So you point them somewhere, hold down that key, and if you then tap hold fire or press fire, he will start shooting rapidly, and then you can move the characters if you're strafing around off in a direction, back and forth, up and down, diagonally, which works really well, because you do get absolutely surrounded in these huge rectangular-ish, sort of square-ish arenas. I'm not quite describing them very well, but they're always the same thing. There's not loads and loads of screens where it's all scrolling. It's just a single arena with you in the center, and then you move around and the whole thing is just set there. You know, the map doesn't move around with you. It's just one single screen at a time. The joystick is very responsive, it's nice, it's snappy, everything moves at a good old pace. Your character feels like he's running whatever direction you go off. You will never die and start grumbling because it's too slow, or you struggle to get your character to move where you want him to. You send him off in a direction, he'll go nipping over there quite quickly, and it suits the game and it works brilliantly. To the top left and right of the screen, you can see scores of, that's basically your money that you've collected, as well as lives for both players. These are shown exactly the same whether you're having a one-player game or a two-player. It's a bit of a shame. You would think they'd hide that away somewhere, and it's part of the map screen as well. Sorry, not the map screen, the arena screen that you're actually on. It's part of the graphics, and it doesn't sit over anything. It's just there. It's a nice enough effect, and it is out of the way, but you just wonder maybe they could just done a little bit something different than that. Again, this is an arcade port though, so it would be cheating if they did do anything too different there. You do start off with 7 lives and a single continue, but as you're exploring the game, you can collect other lives, earn enough points and get continues and things. It's quite fair in that regard. The game itself is fairly difficult, so you really do need these lives, and it's always a good idea if you see any that appear on the floor. Icons appear at random. It's usually after you've killed something, and it can be like a weapon to use or something that will help you out, like a speed boost sort of thing. But if you see a life, you want to go darting over there quickly, because you really do need them. These areas where you really do take on some bullet sponge type enemies, and you really need to be tough enough to survive, and you will die a lot, I'll have to say. When you clear the first arena on any of the stages throughout, you will be shown a mini map, and that's it. You cannot look at this map again. It doesn't come up as an option, only at the beginning. So you just have a quick look at that, and then you nip off in a direction, and you have to plan your way through the level to get to the boss, which is all indicated on this screen. Now, not all the rooms are accessible without you taking the right path, so it does require a bit of planning, but you can't go back and forth between the rooms and say something like a Zelda style dungeon. It is that sort of a arena in a way. You know, you can move from these individual rooms, but once you've gone from one room to another, you can't go back. You've always got to press on. But one thing it doesn't do is you can't get into an area and then you're stuck there. You know, you can't then escape. There's no areas that are just like a single room, and then if you go into it, you die. That's the end of it. You can always work your way around and end up in the boss no matter what happens. You just can't go back to previous rooms. The maps are, that's very confusing sound, isn't it? But the maps are set up so that you always move towards the boss at the end. Each room is filled with 4 doors at up, down, left and right. You get the choice depending on which way you've come in. Nice and simple, and as I said, there's a boss towards the end. Like I said before, there are lots and lots of weapons and items dotted around the stages. You get things like grenades, a spray shot, which is sort of similar to a shotgun in a way, rockets, which can take out loads of things at once. It's almost like a bazooka, a robot companion that will circle around you and it will fire off random shots at enemies. That's very, very handy to have. There's also things like spinning blades, golden or brass, I'm not sure what the right word is for that colour. You're not too sure when you're looking at that, and that's just my memory. But they spin around you, and then just after so many hits, they disappear. It's nice precise, it's quick. None of these last for huge length of time. If things like with the robot, if it takes too many hits, it will just disappear or vanish. And there's other things like shields, speed boost, extra lives, as I said before. None of these are required, but they do help out a great deal, and it can really help you clear a room quickly, because you can't move on unless you've cleared a room entirely. It really does have fantastic futuristic graphics. It's very much like Chaos Engine in a way, that sort of steampunk style futuristic setting. Every zone throughout the entire game is different. They can just be simple things like different coloured metal floors, but lots of tiles and pipes and things like that. A lot of these arenas did remind me of Speedball 2, especially with the way that pitch looks. This is very similar in style with the graphics. This is just a madcap run and gun shooter at the end of the day, and thankfully there are piles upon piles of different enemies littered throughout every single room and arena that you go through. Every time you go into one of these sections, they really pile through the doors and they come in massive crowds. At some point in it, I was thinking, my god, it's going to start slowing down, the frame rate's going to suffer. It never does. It stays pretty stable throughout, and you get an impressive number of them piling through. A lot of them go after like 1 or 2 shots, which is fine, but it can be really scary when you've got 3 or 4 doors opening and there's just enemy after enemy after enemy all coming in these huge crowds and then gathering around you, either firing guns or swinging bats. It can become very, very manic. They all move at different speeds as well, so there's a fair bit of variety with the enemy types there. But you've got things like normal thugs, you know, humans, faster ones, I think those are in red outfits usually, so you can sort of work out what's what. I don't know how to describe it. They're like tank men. They're these little tanks that roll around on little tracks, and then you've got a guy in the middle, and I think he's actually part of the tank. One of the bosses is like this, as a sort of mutant man tank, which is absolutely huge, and it's like a mini version of that. You've got things like robots, orbs that fire, snakes, lizard men as you get further into the game. You know, there are too many different types of enemies. Some of the enemies you come across, they've got different colour types, but it still adds enough that there's enough difference there. They're like, some of them will be faster than the other ones. You can always tell the difference between them, and the fact you've got so many pouring through the doors, it makes it absolutely crazy of some of the situations that you need to survive. Now, as I said, each of the zones does have a huge boss, and what I mean by that, it can almost fill a quarter of the screen in some cases. You've got things like big robot faces, a mutant tank man, cobras coming out of the ground and spinning around, and these are firing all sorts of weapons. They can be moving in a set pattern to some degree, but a lot of the time they will come charging right at you, and you've got to be really moving fast. And if you've not got like the speed power up, a lot of time you will die, and you will die repeatedly. Now luckily when you do die, you get like a few seconds of invulnerability and a shield. Now this will only last for several seconds after it's hit by other enemies. At times you can use this to go darting through a crowd of them, because it's almost like a razor shield. It will kill them upon contact, but it will dissipate quite quickly. And at times you can use that to your advantage, because you can run right up the side of a boss, grace this shield off the side of him and watch it disappear, and it will take loads of hits off them. Some of these can feel like a right struggle, but if you persevere long enough and take your time and stay off at a distance and keep shooting, most of the time you'll be able to avoid them and just about survive. But some of these bosses are a real challenge, and it doesn't hide that fact. There are loads of rooms and zones dotted throughout, and even with a quick run through, you're definitely looking at over an hour's gameplay. That's a lot for an arcade title like this. It's no wonder it soaked up so many quarters back at the day. It's certainly not bad for an arcade port. In case you're wondering, there is no music beyond a bit of an intro song, and that's right at the beginning. It's very, very brief and quick, and then it's out. There are basic sound effects dotted throughout. All the weapons make individual noises, enemies, voices, things like that. It's very simplistic. It's nothing amazing. It's just average sound effects. It suits the game well enough, but you won't be going out of your way to listen to these thinking it's anything special. Though I must say, they do sound like they've been sampled from the arcade cabinet. The biggest problem of course with this is that lack of music. As I said before, it's very strange. Pretty much load up the initial section and it opens off and it's quite exciting and intense, and it just disappears. It's not looping constantly or replaying. And I tried this on the original, I tried it on the ADS I had, and I also tried it through some emulated versions and other ones that I managed to download online. It definitely isn't there, and looking at some magazine interviews at the time, the sound, they gave it quite high marks, and I couldn't sort of understand why, because it's very limited in the sense that there's no music. It seems to be a common thing for a fair amount of Amiga games, but the system itself is capable of a lot more, and it's a bit disappointing. It's filled with sound effects and lots of voices, which is nice, but even those are very basic and it doesn't really draw you in. There's lots of firing and clinging and metallic clunks, as there should be for this type of a game, but it just isn't very special with the whole soundscape. One of its major issues is it does have some ropey collision detection. Now a lot of the enemies are running around in huge number. They come piling through the doors and they're all like swinging bats, and some of them are firing guns, and they're all, coming after you and chasing you around the screen, which is fine, but at times they are either really accurate or they just miss you completely. You can go skirting through the middle of a crowd of them, firing like any sort of weapon off like crazy, a big spray weapon, and avoiding them, and not a single one of them will touch you. Then all of a sudden 2 or 3 of them will come running up alongside you or come following along, and just one swing and you're dead. That's it, and then you're just taken out. And I'm not sure if it's the collision detection there, if it's done on purpose, but it feels very odd that it's always a bit of a risk to go darting through these crowds of people. And you might think, well, you don't really want to be doing that, why would you anyway? But these are quite small arenas, they're very smallish areas, like rectangle shape. You are squished in there and it just piles all these enemies on top of you, and the collision detection, that part of it, doesn't always work, and you have to run through lots of these enemies just to make your way through at times, and it can feel a bit unfair. Add to that, a fair number of the enemies are actually bullet sponges and will take an absolute ton of hits before they blow up and explode, and it just makes it a lot tougher, I think, than it should be. Now, I know this is an arcade port and I'm quite happy with that, it's quite a good one. However, the game itself, it's not really suited for a home computer or even the consoles. It feels like it needs a lot more variety, you need a lot more to do. You load the main game up, you can choose 1 or 2 players, the joystick modes that you're actually using, and that's it. There's no other options, you can't fiddle with things, change the difficulty, do anything else with it. There's no sort of challenge mode or story type thing. They haven't done anything but a straight up port of the arcade game. Again, that's fine, but when you're paying around £25, and this is back in the days where you sat there as a kid, you get very excited you've got this game, you would hope there'd be a lot more to it than this. I did love the fact that you get the choice to use different joysticks and sort of setups with this. You can't fiddle with the buttons or anything, but it has this fire lock mode where you have to hold down the Amiga key and then hold fire on the joystick and then move the stick around for your person to lock in a single direction, say off to the left or right or up or down at an angle, and then just, strafe back and forth to spurt bullets everywhere like crazy, which is fine, but I felt like it was going to break my wrist halfway through. Even after like 5 or 10 minutes, my thumb was just stuck off to the side because I had to keep that pressed down. I couldn't really do it with my finger because it was making me wrist ache, and I had to put the actual full pad on the table whilst I was doing the gameplay footage, and it just became very painful. I did try it with an Amiga joystick, and even with the flatness of my joystick sat on the desk, I had no joy with it. I really did struggle. It was fine for a while, but the fact that you're having to stretch across and keep that Amiga key pressed down, it would have been much better if you'd have just been able to tap the key and it activates it, and then you can spurt around and just keep in that direction. You tap the key again and it turns off. Now if you're playing this on emulator, you're probably going to be fine because you can go into the options and set another key onto your controller. Again, that isn't an issue, but if you go on original hardware with this, you are going to struggle with it, and I suspect you're not going to be able to do much more than short bursts because it really does take some effort to play. Let's have a look at the magazine reviews. CU Amiga gave it 90%, Amiga Action 85%, Amiga Power 81%, The One magazine gave it 71%, and the lowest of the low was Amiga format at 61, and they compared it with similar problems I mentioned. But overall, that's a mixed bag of reviews. They are really at the high end and they drop down pretty low. For myself, I'm in two minds about these reviews. I don't think I agree with the high-end ones up at 90%. I think that's the highest one I could actually see. The thing is, as an arcade port, this is spot on. It looks fantastic, it doesn't change too much, it controls very well, everything's really nippy, the control systems work good enough. I know it's a pain to say use that Amiga key, you can get around with it on an emulator. Bit more annoying when you're actually playing it on original hardware, but overall it does what it sets out to do well enough, and it's quite a good version of what you would expect to see in the arcade. Though it does feel like something you would pick up and play in a very short burst, mostly because I don't think your wrists are going to last. Maybe when I was a kid it would have been fine, but for these days most people are going to struggle with this. Now it's very fun to play. Sadly it's a bit lacking in parts. You could probably get through this, I think it's about an hour's time. I've had a look at some of the playthrough. I couldn't last for an hour to an hour and 15 minutes on this. My wrists would never forgive me. But you're probably going to get bored with this after about 10 or 15 minutes. The arenas are a bit samey throughout. It doesn't really diversify. I mean, fair enough, the maps and the backgrounds do change, you get the odd bosses dotted around, but the core experience, the actual arenas that you go in, they're not very different every single time, maybe different enemies, but it all becomes very similar after a while, and you'll probably get a bit miffed with it after anything more than a short burst. It does give you the option to play with two joysticks if you've got them, which I thought was a very neat touch. So one will be moving you around and so you could be flying all over the map, and the other one will just direct the fire, so you point it off in a direction and he fires off like crazy. And that's similar to what you will get in the arcade machine, and it's not something a lot of other Amiga games would do. I just wish that they'd expanded the game out a bit more. This is a home port after all. Other arcade ports tend to get over this by adding things like extra levels or maybe challenge modes or different things to do. There isn't anything in this, it's just the arcade game, which I'm sure is fine. That's probably what you wanted back in the day, but coming back to it these days, I want a little bit more. I'd like to be a bit more involved, and I think it would have improved the game massively to add these extra modes and different things to do. However, having said all that, you really can't look down on this game at all, because it does nail what this arcade game is, what it's supposed to be. The sense of fun, that craziness, the running man, futuristic style, and the cheeky bit of humour dotted around. It's a shame there's no music throughout. It always does spoil games a bit. Then looking at the original arcade, it's not that sort of a thing either. It's very straightforward. It's pretty much a shooter. It's very quick. It's fast, it's a blur of fun, and it feels like the arcade game. It nails that part perfectly, and that's what you want from an arcade port. You didn't want anything less than that, and it does it perfectly. So thumbs up to it on that part. It might not be to everyone's taste, and if you want anything deeper, you're going to have to go and look elsewhere, a different type of game. I believe there was some sort of unofficial port of this where a guy came along, I think it's called Smash TV, a rip-off. You can pick it up now for free. It came out at the time, it was a shareware version. The guy did his own version of the arcade game, and it's supposed to be much better. I did watch some YouTube footage of it, and it looked a lot more entertaining. It probably removed a lot of the issues with this one. The only problem is the guy didn't really know what he was doing, and I think it's got a fair few bugs dotted throughout, but just go and look it up because it's well worth looking into. Overall, I would recommend this, but only in short bursts. It's the perfect single disc game to have tucked away in the pocket, the sort of thing you would take around your mates and have some multiplayer matches with, because it's a fair bit of fun, but you're not going to get anything more out of it than that. And sadly, it's time to bring this week's episode to a close. Now, if you've liked anything you've heard today, or if you'd like to comment, you can pop along to AMIGArama.com, come along to the Facebook page on facebook.com/AMIGArama, or pop along to Twitter, which is @AMIGAramaPod. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of our Patreons. This week they are Adam Bradley, Figgy CTZ, Graham Vebke, Glenn Milford, also known as Casual Retro Gamer with his weekly show, Jason Warnes, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, Retro Ravi, Richard Legg, Sneff and Treble. That list is getting bigger all the time. Of course, if you want to join and help contribute to the show, then please pop along to the Patreon page. Until next time, guys.